I'd like to invite Carly up. Who's Carly? Who loves Carly? Anyone here? Yeah. Good response. Good response. We are so grateful to have Carly as part of the Welton Church family. She is a hugely effective therapist, a great safeguarding officer, an amazing house group leader, a really good trainer. That's not on my little list as well. Amazing mum as well. That should go on there as well. Most of all, she loves... Do you say that's a given?
No, I said ask my children.
Oh, yeah. Most of all, she loves people deeply, and by this we see the love of God through her. And so let's pray for Carly as he shares with us this morning. Yeah, Lord, we do thank you for Carly being in this place and being part of this family. And for what you've put on her heart to share this morning, we thank you for her skills, her experience. And I love it, Lord, that that's combined with her love for you. And we just pray that as we sit and listen this morning, that your Holy Spirit would be resting on us. Give us open ears. Let your words sink into our hearts. Let us take something away this morning, which is of you. Amen.
All right. I'm a bit sway. So I'll start with a mild trigger warning. Some of the stuff that we're going to be thinking through today might kind of resonate with you a bit, with some tricky feelings. And so the prayer team are going to be around at the end, and you can grab someone and pray that through with them. Okay, so I thought I'd start by giving Dave a run for his money with the title of this. The use of scooter helmets in therapy, useful Scrabble hints, and why lambs are better than human babies. I'm going to tell you a bit about me and my day-to-day life. Every morning, I wake up to this beautiful thing. Isn't she lovely? I make coffee for everyone that wants it and delivers it to them. While I'm making coffee, I empty the dishwasher and I begin to notice all the jobs that my children were supposed to do that they've done in their own special way, and I go around picking up the pieces or nagging them or begging them. And when I say my children, my house is frequently littered with multiple teenagers. I kind of collect them. And they're all responsible for the crimes that I'm about to exhibit. Let me show you. So that was put away the leftovers from last night's tea. Next. That was clean the sink. You can't see that one, but it's gross. Yeah, that was someone coming down, bringing the empties from their rooms. It still had some coffee in it, spilt it, left it. Yeah, that was just eating snacks and leaving it. That was, I made lunch. I cleared away lunch. Okay. So then I might reply to a few texts or emails, carry out some parental duties like plaiting hair and giving lifts. I put on a wash and get into my running gear. All that takes about an hour. And the thing is, for that entire time, no matter what the weather, I'm sweating. Oh yeah, I stink. I am gross. Why is this happening? Well, here's my theory. After getting up every morning and going for a run 4 days of the week, every week for about 20 years, my body knows what to expect. It has learned that this is what I need to do and how to support me. It knows that my sweat is required most mornings, and it's going to support me in that process of going for a run. And you could say it automatically provides it on tap, so to speak. Again, gross. Why am I telling you this? Because when we think about trauma, we're thinking about our bodies responding in ways that they have come to expect the world to demand of it. Like my morning runs, trauma trains us to respond to what we believe is the inevitable truth about ourselves, about relationships, and about the world we live in. We all experience trauma at some point in our lives, so in a bit I'll outline what that might include. Given the right conditions, we can recover from trauma really quickly. These conditions are re-establishment of actual and perceived safety, 2, being able to verbalise our trauma and tell our story, and 3, being around at least one safe person and being able to tell them what happened. So, for those of us who have given birth or been scared while their partner gives birth, we suffered a trauma and we recovered because of these conditions. For those of us who've been in an accident or lost a loved one, we have suffered a trauma and recovered or are recovering because of these conditions. And in many ways, it's that simple, and I could finish my talk now. In fact, on the basis of this, you'd be reasonable to question what trauma recovery has got to do with health at all. But it isn't that simple, because people don't always have access to the conditions I've described. And even if they do, some people don't know how to use those resources because of their previous experiences of relationships, particularly early relationships. And finally, the way that trauma works means that we need to find ways to stop feeling the effects of it. And some of those ways mean that our lifestyles make it difficult for us to access safety. When I refer to trauma in this talk, we're thinking about emotional injury. The injury might come through a physical injury, particularly where we fear the loss of our lives. Usually, though, the most significant effects of trauma come where that trauma is relational, and that's what I'm going to focus on. This type of trauma could be caused by loss of a loved one or a separation from them. It could be rejection or abuse. It could be a violation of our emotional or physical boundaries. Worse still is where relational trauma occurs over a prolonged period of time. It's important to recognise that trauma can be caused at any age, including pre-birth in utero. And just because those things happen to us as babies or young children, we don't forget it and move on. In my work with families, I describe this as us having two types of memory. The first type is what I call story memories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. These types of story memories are memories that children can tell me about, like a day at the beach or when they broke their arm. Then I explain that we also have body memories, about things that happened before we knew how to remember them or to speak about them, and it's our bodies that remember them. In nature, mammals in the wild who experience near-death experiences often physically shake, a bit like me right now, when the danger has passed. We don't know how to do that. Instead, our brains and our nervous systems become geared towards expecting threat and danger. It gets paved as pathways in the brain. In the words of a clever dude called Peter Levine, zebras don't get ulcers. They live in very stressful environments, but they don't get ulcers. Human beings get ulcers because they imagine all the terrible things that could happen. And I know that once you've experienced the world in a scary way, you get really good, really quickly at imagining what's around the corner. And you begin to believe that you are the source of trouble, and that you are the bad, and that you frequently experience the ugly, dirty emotion that is pervasive shame. Again, this is particularly relevant to those who have experienced childhood trauma. The effects of trauma can be huge and can cause difficulties, and I'm just going to list a few. Mental health difficulties, addiction, substance abuse, poor self-worth, relationship difficulties, a dependency on control or power, isolation, phobias, compulsive behaviour, flashbacks, difficulty relating to others, panic attacks, social anxiety, gastrointestinal issues, impulsivity, aggression, suicidality, and risk-taking behaviour. The trouble with trauma is that because it shapes our nervous systems, we're always finding ways to soothe our systems. There is a part of our brain called the amygdala, which is a lovely word that in the right circumstances could help you win at Scrabble. The amygdala is an almond-shaped part of the brain that acts like a danger detector. Whenever our brains sense anything at all, the amygdala explores the archives of our brain about every previous experience we've ever had for information about what it's sensing, and then decides whether it's safe or dangerous. When we've experienced prolonged emotional trauma, it's hardwired to respond in ways as if we are more in danger than we are. And when we feel more in danger, physically, emotionally, or both, the nervous system goes into overdrive to protect and to soothe us. Some of those soothing ways are great, like running or praying or music or playing rough and tumble with nieces and nephews until they laugh so hard they can't breathe. Like I said earlier, other ways are a bit unhelpful, like substance dependency, or always looking out for the next bit of drama, or perfectionism, or the pursuit of power. And those things do momentarily soothe our systems, but they also lead to really poor health and relationship outcomes. John 10, verse 10, tells us that Jesus came that we might have life and have it to the full. Unrecovered trauma is like the thief that Jesus talks about in this verse, robbing us of our best in multiple aspects of life. So what does the Bible say about trauma, and what can we find that is helpful to us in the here and now? The Old Testament is littered with cycle after cycle of trauma. Esau was rejected and humiliated by his mother, and it tore apart his relationship with his brother. Jacob favored his younger son, and his brothers tried to kill him, but he got away with being sold as a slave and false imprisonment. The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt and had their baby sons murdered. David had multiple murder attempts on his life, he lost his best friend, and he wrote about troubling thoughts and despair in the book of Psalms. Hannah experienced great anguish and grief at not being able to conceive a child and the social humiliation that would have come with that. An entire race of people was split in two. A terrified but incredibly brave Esther risked her life out of fear of the annihilation of her people. Poor Job. And then in the New Testament, Jesus touched the lives of so many people who were outcasts and rejected, people with physical ailments that ruined their lives. A common belief was that these people's difficulties were caused by their own sin or the sin of their parents. And then Jesus himself was hated, rejected, tortured, and murdered, and Mary watched while all this happened to her child. Paul was beaten and imprisoned and outcast. I want to think about the woman at the well that we read about in the Gospel of John. We read that Jesus came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away to the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is who asks you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered and said to her, "Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I give will never be thirsty. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, that I may not thirst or come here to draw." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered and said, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, You have said well, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one to whom you have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where we ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither worship on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for the salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know the Messiah is coming, who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." So there's so much in this passage that helps us to understand the nature of God, Jesus' approach to the social pariahs of the time, to women in particular, and about worship. But today, I'm going to focus on the aspects of the passage that help us to understand trauma recovery. The passage starts by telling us that this was a Samaritan woman. The Samaritans were considered half-breeds, apologise for the obtuse language, by most Jews. This was because of the influx of the Assyrians when they conquered Israel in around 700 BC. They took a number of Jews to Assyria as captive slaves, but they also moved a great number of Assyrians into the conquered land. The Jews intermarried with the Assyrians, and this affected their religion, which became a mixture of Judaism and Assyrian idolatry. As was the culture of the time, women would have had little say over who had sex with them, and rape was commonplace. So this woman's descendants were the Samaritans, and were despised by the Jews and the Assyrians alike, and the Samaritans hated them right back. So the woman at the well comes to it, like the rest of her race, with some elements of generational trauma, having to survive a hostile, rejecting society that tells her and those of her kind that she doesn't belong. The passage tells us that Jesus meets her at the well in the middle of the day. In the Middle East, it turns out it's ridiculously hot around midday, the type of weather that only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in, and, as it goes, people who don't want to run into anyone else. So this woman is there because of her shame, and the rejection she's experienced because of her life choices. She goes in the heat of the day because no one else will be there. Let's just link that back to the social isolation and self-esteem issues that trauma can lead to. She's amazed that Jesus, a Jewish male, is speaking to her. She focuses on the physical water, the most vital substance for sustaining human life. But Jesus starts to talk to her about her emotional and spiritual needs. She's focused on what she thinks she needs the most because she's a survivor, and I would argue, a survivor of trauma. My job as a therapist for traumatized kids and their families, my job is as a therapist for traumatized kids and their families. 95% of the kids I work with have experienced early childhood trauma and have entered the care system at some point in their life. The majority of the children then live in foster, adoptive, or special guardian families. About 6 years ago, I started working with a boy called Michael. He came to his very first therapy session wearing a scooter helmet, which was probably wise because another kid I work with threw my bunch of keys at my head a few weeks later, which I just about avoided in a ninja-style move. Throughout his session with me, Michael and his mummy played some games, talked about a few non-heavy subjects, and the session came to an end. During the course of the session, I'd noticed that he liked to be in control. When it came to leaving, Michael asked to take a toy from the shelf in my room with him. He'd been dropping big hints about how much he liked it for the whole hour, and I acknowledged his comments. "Thanks for letting me know, Michael." Before he left, exasperated about why I hadn't already offered for him to take the toy, he asked me outright to take it. "Thank you for asking," I said, "but the toys in this room belong to me, and I share them with all the children that come here, so I can't let you take it." He was not pleased. He asked me why again and tried to reason with me. After some toing and froing, he said, "I'm not going until you give it to me." So I said to Michael, "You know what, mate? I reckon the reason you're finding it so hard to leave without that toy is because you carry around a big, horrible, empty feeling inside of you all the time. And I think that getting given things or being allowed to keep things makes that feeling go away for just a little bit, and it feels better. So you can stay here as long as you like, but if you stay, we're going to have to talk about that big, empty, horrible feeling." Michael considered my proposal for 3.5 seconds, then huffed away out of the door, followed by his mummy, who gave me a surprised approving nod. The similarities between Michael and the Samaritan woman aren't worlds apart when Jesus first begins his conversation with her. Both Michael and the woman have experienced various levels of trauma over many years. As far as Michael is concerned, you're just going to have to take my word for it. As for the woman at the well, I've already mentioned the intergenerational trauma and the rejection from society. But I think there's more. Jesus starts to tell the next part of her trauma story. You've been married 5 times and now you're with someone else. I think it's far from unreasonable to say that if you've been married 5 or 6 times, you might have experienced some difficulty with relationships. And when we have that level of difficulty, it usually comes from not having a healthy model of relationships that involves love, warmth, and consistency. And I'm pretty sure that was true of the woman at the well as Michael. What do they both do? Focus on what is most important to survive. Toys, stuff, water, where you go to worship. In his conversation with her, Jesus connects to the root of her pain and doesn't shy away from it. I have to say that as British people, we're rubbish at this. It's not our fault. That post-war culture of stiff upper lip, just keep going, helped us to survive 2 world wars, but left a legacy of don't acknowledge pain. Jesus goes right to where it hurts inside of her. I recently went on a brief holiday to Portugal with 6 other women. I managed to come back without another tattoo, so that's something of a miracle or a missed opportunity, depending on how you view it. Lots of us in that group are going through a bunch of difficulties and traumas at the moment, and there was some sharing that happened among us. One morning, a member of our group got a text from home and shared something that had been going on in her life for years that's incredibly challenging off the back of receiving that text. She started to cry, and most of us listened. But one person clearly struggled to manage the intensity of the emotion. And she said, it's okay, don't cry. Look, let's think about something else. We'll go shopping in a minute. I intervened, I might have been a bit cross, and said, it's okay, she can be sad. But the moment was lost. I don't blame the woman who shut the conversation down. She was just managing it the way her own emotion had been managed for her growing up, and how she was currently dealing with a load of tough stuff in her own life. but it wasn't a way that supports trauma recovery. When I'm working with parents and carers, I describe the need for them to stay with their children's story rather than jumping in to rescue or make things better. I actually have another phrase that I use about that I can't repeat here. Jesus takes time to stay with this woman's story, and because he's Christ, he tells her story to her. To recover from trauma, people need to be allowed to tell their story and have it heard in all its rawness. Last week, Keith and Rachel told us that God made us to be in relationship with him and one another. That is true, and I'm going to prove it now. I want you to think about a newborn human baby, all wrinkled and sweet and small. Now think about a newborn lamb, all wrinkled and sweet and small. I work on a farm, and recently my son Noah did a whole week of lambing at the farm. I've got a video on my phone of him delivering a lamb while I pinned the poor ewe against the pen so I could hold her still while he summarily removed the tiny animal from her body. I really considered showing the video today, but I thought some people might be squeamish, and I've already talked about my sweat. If you spend any time within the lambing barn, you'll notice that within minutes of the lamb being born, it can stand up, wobbly walk, and make its own proximity to its mother, identifying her amongst loads of other ewes and drink her milk. Within a few days, the lamb and ewe are out in the field in a larger space. The lamb has moved from a wobbly walk to a definite frolic and can still find its mum among the sheep. Should a fox come along, the lamb can even have a go at running away from the threat. Now let's think about a human baby. I've seen lots of those too. At birth, they can cry, sleep, poo, wee, flail their limbs, and do this with their face. They are utterly and completely dependent on their caregivers for survival. They cannot move towards a source of milk or warmth. Biologically, human babies will swiftly die without the attention, care, and curiosity of a caregiver. I would argue that compared to lambs, human babies are losers. But of course, that's how God made it, because the human child-parent relationship is based on our relationship with him. When someone experiences relational trauma, they need to recover in the context of that relationship. We, as church, need to hear each other's stories and stay with each other's pain. We need to be aware of trauma that gets stored in the body and how we might need to support ourselves or others in getting in touch with how we recover physically and emotionally. A bit of an important aside. I know that around this room, there are amazing people that do and are ready to support others with trauma recovery. But compassion gets crushed by abuse. Hurt people hurt people. They don't mean to, and mostly are doing the best they can, but it can happen. The most liberating experience I've had so far in my life was gradually, in my 30s, changing the way I operated within certain relationships, or even gently ducking out of them when they were damaging to me. The amazing Brené Brown wrote this book, and you should all read it, or better still, audiobook it, because she reads it in her lush Southern American accent and adds all these asides where she says y'all a lot. She's a social researcher, and some of her work looked at compassion. She and her team did more and more research into the most compassionate people in the world. And she started to hypothesize about what makes someone really compassionate. She thought that it might be folk who had been through hardship or really spiritual people, but she was wrong. What her research found was that the most compassionate people in society were people with healthy, clear boundaries. The reason I'm including this is not only because it's important not to get dragged under other people's pain when we're trying to help, it's because Jesus did this with the woman at the well. He was a safe base who didn't get caught up in fixing or explaining all of the stuff this woman was upset by. It's not where you worship that matters, it's how you worship. It's not the difference in our races that matter, you matter. Your story matters to me. Understand that you are speaking with the Christ. This is my relationship with you, and this is what I offer. And then later we read that leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Christ?" And they came out of the town and made their way toward him. The Samaritan woman didn't need her water jar anymore. Through the connection, love, clarity of relationship and connection Jesus showed her, she could begin her journey to trauma recovery. Jesus was about redemption and recovery, and he still is today. We all, at some level, have experienced trauma which affects us, whether it be abuse from another, loss, a physical event, whatever. Our bodies and minds need to navigate healing. One hugely important aspect of trauma and trauma recovery are the positive effects that it can have on our lives. I haven't had time to focus on that today, but it can give us superpowers like heightened empathy or creativity or leadership skills, compassion and generosity. The woman at the well instantly became a prolific spreader of God's love. She was one of the first people that Jesus openly told he was the Messiah, God's Son. Jesus broadcast to us loud and clear that it's relationship that's key to recovery. Because of her relationship with Jesus, she put down her water jar and led other people to him. 1 John 4:18 tells us that perfect love casts out all fear. Jesus showed the woman at the well what perfect love is, and by us standing with others, hearing their stories, and accepting their pain, we can offer that to each other too.